Peace is defined as a lack of conflict and a freedom from fear of violence. It's tranquility and harmony, and it's a critical component to happiness. And Islam, my friends, is precisely not that. This is Islam is a Religion of Peace, Debunked. Okay, I might have been a bit facetious in my intro, but I nevertheless stand by the sentiment of what I said. Islam is not a religion of peace, and in this video I want to predominantly explain why. However, for the purpose of clarity, I want to first put this argument in its syllogistic form. Peace is defined as a lack of conflict and a freedom from fear of violence. Islam acts according to and in seek of peace. Therefore, Islam is a religion of peace. In my opinion, when somebody employs this argument, the first thing to do is to identify how exactly they're defining the word peace. The reason being is because there are two versions of this argument. The first is one in which the proponent is sincerely asserting that Islam is a religion of peace as defined colloquially. And the second is one in which the proponent is periodically using an Islamic definition of the word peace. Hence, this is why it's important to get them to define peace from the outset. To debunk the second version first, because, screw logic, it's important that we first understand what exactly Islam means within the Islamic world. The word Islam is derived from the Arabic word salam, a word literally meaning peace, and Islam as a religious practice refers to a person submitting herself or himself to the will of Allah in order to seek eternal peace and tranquility. Or to put it more bluntly, in the Islamic world, Islam is the definition of peace, and therefore Islam is, by definition, a religion of peace. Now, if that's not an obvious example of circular reasoning, I don't know what is. Defining Islam as peace and then asserting that Islam is peaceful is as circular as defining Nazism as love and then asserting that Nazism is loving. Not only is this confusing, it's deceitful. What's more is that when the proponents of this argument use the colloquial definition of the word peace within their first and third premises, but use the Islamic definition of the word peace for their second premise, they're actually committing a classic equivocation fallacy. By interchanging between two different definitions of peace throughout their premises, their argument is incoherent and therefore invalid. What about those who assert that Islam is a religion of peace as defined colloquially? The likes of Majid Nawaz and Ziba Khan. How exactly have these people come to the conclusion that Islam is indeed a religion of peace? Well, to begin, while they recognise that countless atrocities have been committed in the name of Islam, they nevertheless maintain that these acts are the result of fanatics, extremists, and militants taking Islamic teaching out of context. But to raise an immediate objection, this claim is false. Flat out, demonstrably false. As I demonstrated in my video about Islamophobia, the Quran and the Hadith possess countless violent verses that instruct Muslims, and moderate Muslims do indeed endorse and commit many reprehensible atrocities with explicit reference to Islamic teaching. What's more is that they do incessantly claim jurisdiction over the experience of others, and so they are therefore not peaceful. To name but a few examples, a poll of over 38,000 Muslims from over 39 different countries found that 60% of moderate Muslims believe that a wife should obey her husband, 75% believe that it is necessary to believe in Allah to be a moral person, 40% want the death penalty for those who leave Islam, and 60% want Sharia law to be the official law of their country. What's more is that even 61% of moderate British Muslims believe that homosexuals should be punished. So, as Sam Harris says, the problem is not religious extremism, because extremism is not a problem if your core beliefs are truly non-violent. The problem isn't fundamentalism. The only problem with Islamic fundamentalism is the fundamentals of Islam. To hammer home this point, Harris often uses the example of Jainism as an actual religion of peace, as its central tenet is non-violence and respect towards all living beings. The more extreme a Jainist becomes, the less we need to worry about them. But so far as I am aware, the same cannot be said of any other religion, and especially not for Islam. To quote Harris again, and yes, Harris is going to feature in a lot of my videos because I think he is way beyond his time. The problem is that Islam isn't a religion of peace, and the so-called extremists are seeking to implement what is arguably the most honest reading of the faith's actual doctrine. A second prominent objection that the proponents of this argument present is that of contextualization. For example, to paraphrase Nawaz, Muhammad and the history of Islam must not be judged by the standards of civilization that we, after an accumulation of thousands of years, have arrived at. Islamic history must be judged by the standards of its time. But this is simply nonsense, and here's why. Islam has always uniquely claimed that its teachings are the final and unalterable revelation from the Almighty, and that by extension its edicts are absolutely final. Therefore, because Muhammad practiced and Islam endorses and encourages elderly men to take young girls as wives, this rule is final. For a Muslim to now contextualize this edict and practice is to reject that Muhammad's example and revelation is final. In fact, it's worth pointing out that in Saudi Arabia there isn't an age restriction for marriage whatsoever. And of course, the reason for this is explicitly Islamic. What's more is that even if Islam didn't claim to be the final and unalterable word of the creator of the universe, we still can and should judge its historical acts despite its context. Hell, future generations will certainly look back at our actions today and judge us, and they should. A third prominent objection that the proponents of this argument present is the assertion that Christianity is not a religion of peace either, often by referring to the Crusades, etc. Now of course, this is true, Christianity is definitely not a religion of peace, but to bring this up is simply a red herring. It's a distraction and a redundant use of energy. It's the equivalent of someone saying in a debate about Hitler's atrocities that Stalin was worse. It's irrelevant, and because of this it can be dismissed without serious consideration. And finally, a small point I'd like to make before I recap is that yes, pretty much any religion, and any ideology for that matter, can be practiced peacefully. But this doesn't mean that the religion or ideology is peaceful itself. To be a peaceful Muslim you need a very peculiar interpretation of Islam indeed. You need to reject the vast majority of its teachings and pick and mix the peaceful verses. You know, just like modern Christians. So, to recap, the second variation of the argument that Islam is a religion of peace is flawed because it commits a circular reasoning fallacy, and it commits an equivocation fallacy. And the first variation of the argument that Islam is a religion of peace is flawed because moderate Muslims do promote and commit atrocities in the name of Islam, not just fanatics. Contextualization is irrelevant, and some, but not all proponents of this argument, commit a red herring fallacy. Anyhow, as always, thank you kindly for the view, and instead of leaving you with an overwhelmingly powerful argument to consider, I'm instead going to leave you with a quote from Douglas Murray.
The fact is that Islam is many things, many things. But to say it's a religion of peace is nonsense. It's to ignore reality. It's to ignore very difficult but necessary facts, not paradigms, but facts. To say that Islam is a religion of peace is to say something based entirely on hope. It's to elevate a hope into truth. And I hope, as you all know, history teaches us that's a very bad thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smart.